Paradise for you to escape to. Those are the words that God speaks to a young girl who was kidnapped and tried clinging to him after he killed a childhood friend of hers, sacrificed her humanity to become an apostle. It's a brutal line, but it's also the most honest summary of what the Berserk universe is about. No salvation, no relief. Just the machinery of a world that doesn't care whether you live or die, suffer or survive. Berserk is a dark fantasy manga by Kentaro Miura following Guts, a lone mercenary cursed to be hunted by demons, who battles both human enemies and terrifying supernatural forces. Its worlds blends with medieval Europe, with the demonic realms where fate, sacrifice, and ambition shape brutal outcomes. The series explores themes of free will, trauma, and the cost of power through intense, often tragic storytelling. At its core, it is about survival and the search for meaning in a universe that offers none. But calling it simply a dark fantasy undersells it entirely. I'd argue Berserk belongs to a far more specific and disturbing genre, cosmic horror. And today, I want to walk you through exactly why. Cosmic horror is a subgenre built not around gore or jump scares, but around a single, deep, unsettling idea that the universe is indifferent to human existence, and that there are forces so far beyond our comprehension that encountering them doesn't threaten your life, it threatens your ability to make sense of reality at all. H.P. Lovecraft popularized this genre with creatures to whom humanity are like ants, not hated, not targeted, just relevant. The horror is in malice, its scale. Now, Berserk's apostles, the individual term Guts fights, are more in the supernatural category. But as the story deepens and the God Hand and the idea of evil become more into focus, Berserk shifts decisively into the cosmic horror territory. The strongest piece of evidence I have for that is the Clifford arc. After Guts briefly encounters Slan, one of the God Hand members in person, Shirke, one of the most gifted young magician users in the series, looks at Guts afterwards and is able to make sense what he experienced. Despite her composure, the sheer weight of what she perceived through him causes her to physically fall to her knees. That's not a reaction to violence, that's a reaction to something exists outside the scale of what the human mind can process. That is cosmic horror. The eclipse is where Berserk stops being a grim war story and becomes something entirely. Griffith, at its lowest point, triggers the Crimson Behelate and summons the God Hand. They offer him a choice: sacrifice the band of the Hawk, the people who followed him and bled for him for years, and be reborn as one of them. And he says yes. What makes this cosmic horror rather than just a tragedy is the environment. The ground becomes a field of red screaming faces. The sky goes dark. The apostles gather to devour the band members, not out of rage, not out of cruelty, but as a ritual function. The God Hand doesn't hate the Hawks. They don't even acknowledge them as individuals. They are fuel. That indifference, the complete absence of malice, alongside the complete absence of mercy, is the defining feature of cosmic horror. The Eclipse runs through chapters 73 to 83, and if you haven't read it, you seriously need to. This is the most single important piece of lore in the series, and Miura himself tried to bury it. In chapter 83, sometimes called the Lost Chapter, was never reprinted in any collection volume at Miura's own request. He felt that revealing God this early locked the story into a direction he wasn't ready for. What the chapter shows is the idea of evil, a vast mound of flesh residing in the humanity's collective consciousness. It wasn't created by some external force. It was generated by humans' desperate need for a reason behind its suffering. We needed there to be a cause for all of our pain, so we collectively willed one into existence. And that entity, born from our own grief, then took control of causality itself, engineering more suffering to sustain its own existence. That's Lovecraftian horror at its most complete. A god that didn't create humanity, a god that humanity accidentally created, which now runs the world as a closed system of manufactured despair. And chapter 82 gives you the first glimpse, and chapter 83 is a full conversation between Griffith and the entity. The Clifford is an underground pocket dimension, a place where the membrane between the physical world drag captives there to be used as breeding vessels for more demons. That is already horrific as it is. But what makes it cosmic horror specifically is that no one built it. No one even designed it. It's not a villain's lair. It's just what happens naturally when the world's metaphysical structure decays in a particular way. Shirke can perceive the astral layer, which means she can see the Clifford as it is. Not a cave, but a living, pulsing, dimensional wound. And here's the key thing, her understanding of it changes nothing. It is a conventional horror. Knowledge is power. In cosmic horror, knowledge just means you understand exactly how powerless you are. Guts fights through the entire space, rescues the captives, and gets out. The Clifford doesn't collapse, it doesn't get destroyed. It simply closes off when the conditions that caused it to manifest change. His heroism had zero effect on the thing itself. He hadn't defeated it, he just survived it. And that has been Guts' motto since the day he was born. That's the distinction which is everything. He doesn't need to win, he just needs to survive. There are two scenes in Berserk that most people treat as separate moments, and I want to argue that they're the same piece of world building landing twice, and together they reveal something more disturbing than either does alone. The first is in the early chapters of the Black Swordsman arc. Guts forces the Count, a powerful apostle, to activate his Behelate. The God Hand appear and offer their standard deal: sacrifice what you love the most, and be reborn. The Count's sacrifice would be his daughter, Theresia. He refuses, and as a punishment, he is dragged screaming into the vortex of souls, a churning mass face of bodies, all conscious, all in agony, endlessly dissolving without ever fully existing. The second part is with the encounter of the most terrifying apostles in the series, Wild. He is dying, and he begs, not for his life, he begs for Griffith to use his Behle. So the God Hand will appear, because the only thing Wild fears more than death is what comes after without the protection. When reading together, these scenes establish Vortex is not a punishment for specific people. It is simply where human souls go. The default afterlife in Berserk's world is not peace, not judgment, not rest. It is an ocean of suffering where individual identity erodes, but awareness persists. Every single person who has ever died in that world, ever will die in that world, soldiers, civilians, the band of the hawk, is presumably already there. And this reframes the Godhead entirely. They are not just powerful demons, they are the administrators of the system. The deal they offer through the Behle isn't really about power, it's about escape. The sacrifice is not worth the price of strength, it is the price of not ending up in the vortex. When trying to understand what makes Berserk's horror different, a lot of modern fiction softens villains. Demons get redemption arcs, monsters get through backstories designed to generate sympathy rather than dread. Berserk doesn't do that. Miura makes evil genuinely evil, and he does that without apology. The Behle doesn't offer power arbitrarily, it demands a sacrifice of whatever makes you human, the thing that loves you the most. For the Count, that was his daughter. For Griffith, it was the band of the hawk. The apostles don't become monsters despite their choices. They become monsters because of them. And Griffith, having ascended to godhood, never seeks forgiveness. He says plainly, I will never betray my dream. That's not a villain trying to justify himself. That's someone who looked at what he did and accepted it completely. That's the level of commitment to evil, without self deception, is rarer and more disturbing than any amount of graphic violence. And underneath all of it, one law that Miura never breaks. It doesn't matter how strong you are, there is always a bigger fish. Guts is extraordinary. He is one of the most capable fighters in the entire series. Dare I say, he is the most powerful human, perhaps aside from King Geiseric. And the Godhand doesn't even consider him as a threat. That gap between human power at its absolute ceiling and the forces that run the world is a structural definition of cosmic horror. The entire cosmology of Berserk is a closed loop. Humanity created the god that created the system that destroys humanity. There is no outside, there is no rescue, there is just the machinery running exactly as intended. And that is not cosmic horror. That is something more sophisticated horror fiction ever put onto the page. This is my first video, and I know I have a lot to improve in terms of narration and editing, but I genuinely believe Berserk deserves to be talked about in these terms. And as you know, since I'm editing this video, it's still June 9th, and the new Berserk chapter 384 will come out. And I'd love to hear what you think about it in the comments. Thank you very much.